Hi, everyone, and thanks for checking out this movie review. So, today we're going to go ahead and take a look at the ninth and final film in my current horror franchise, which is the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. And the film we're going to take a look at today is the 2010 remake, A Nightmare on Elm Street. So, yeah, I'll just kind of go through a short setup and premise of this film, and then I'll get into my thoughts and review, which will contain spoilers. So, A Nightmare on Elm Street remakes a 2010 American slasher film directed by Samuel Bayer and written by Wesley Strick and Eric Heiser. The film is produced by Michael Bay and Platinum Dunes. It's a remake of Wes Craven's 1984 film by the same name and a reboot of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. The film set in the fictitious town of Springwood in Ohio and centers around a group of teenagers living on one street, Elm Street, who are stalked and murdered in their dreams by a disfigured man named Freddy Krueger. The teenagers discover that they all share a common link from their childhood that makes them targets for Freddy. So the film opens at the Springwood Diner, where we're introduced to a character, Dean Russell, who falls asleep at a table in the diner and ends up meeting Freddy. And Freddy basically cuts Dean's throat in real life. Dean cuts his own throat in front of his friends Chris Fowles and Nancy Holbrook as they look on. And so that's kind of how the film starts. And then we go from there. Of course, the other characters that we're introduced to end up meeting the same demise by Freddy in their dreams. And then it's left, basically, it goes on, and the film's left to Nancy and her sort of boyfriend, I guess, Quentin. They're the last two survivors of this group of teenagers that have to try to um, stop Freddy. So I don't want to get into too much more. There's actually a lot of story for this movie, which I'll get into when I do my review. But that's basically the gist of it, the setup and the gist. So I'll start off by saying that this is actually the first time in preparing for this review in this franchise. This is actually the first time I've watched this movie. I'd seen all the other eight films in this franchise at least once or twice before, but I had not yet seen this movie until I watched it to prepare for this review as part of this franchise. So all I knew about this movie is that it gets shit on a lot over the last 10 or 11 years since it came out. It's a lot of people's least favorite in the franchise. I'll go ahead and start off by saying that I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people say that it is. That doesn't mean that it's good. But I think the fact that I've heard it for 10 years and my expectations were basically through the floor in terms of how low they were probably makes it a more watchable and better film than what I thought it would be going into it. That being said, it's still got a lot of problems with it. And I can see why some people don't like it, but I really don't think it's as terrible as people have made it out over the last 10 years. So I'll start out with the pros, and like most people, you got to start with Jackie Earl Haley, who plays Freddy Krueger in this movie. No easy task to step into the shoes of Robert Englund, basically, who is Freddy Krueger. I mean, 8 of the 9 films in this franchise, he's Freddy Krueger. But I have to admit, Jackie Earl Haley, he has his own version of Freddy, and it's really effective. It's a dark version. It's a different version. He didn't try to copy Robert Englund's version of Freddy. Also, the character really wasn't written like that, especially in the later sequels. It's a very dark version of Freddy, and I think Jackie Earl Haley really pulls it off well. He has good screen presence. He's scary. He's dark. He's sadistic, and he's very believable. And he's even got a few one-liners that I think land pretty well. Granted, a couple of them are repeats from earlier in this franchise. You know, how's this for a wet dream? And I'm your boyfriend now, and things like that. So, but yeah, he's definitely the highlight of this movie. Jackie Earl Haley is Freddy. You know, he's not Robert Englund is Freddy to me, but that being said, he really does a good job and very impressive stepping into that role. For the most part, I thought the acting in this movie, it's mixed, but I would say like 60-70% of it's pretty solid in this movie. Certainly, of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, it's not the worst set of characters or acting, not the best either. Um, but I thought the gal that played Chris, Katie Cassidy, who's not really known to be a great actress, I thought she actually came across pretty well in this movie, and I thought that you know she's kind of the Tina character in the original movie. They changed the names of the characters in this movie, even though they basically are the same characters from the original. They just trying to make it their own. They changed the names of the characters, other than Nancy. Um, I think even her mom has a different name, and we're not really introduced to her dad in this movie. So, what was I getting at here? But no, I thought that Katie Cassidy actually did a pretty good job, even though she's not known to be a great actress. I guess I should go through the cast. Sorry, Jackie Earl Haley's Freddy Krueger, Rooney Mara plays Nancy, Thomas Decker's Jesse Braun, Clancy Brown is Alan Smith, Kyle Gallner is Quentin Smith, Katie Cassidy as Chris Folds, as I said. She does a good job. Kellen Lutz is Dean Russell. Connie Britton is Dr. Gwen Holbrook, the mother of Nancy. So I think Connie Britton, Jackie Earl Haley, and Katie Cassidy are probably the three that do the best job in this movie. Clancy Brown as Alan Smith's good too, but he's not in the movie a whole lot. More so in flashback scenes, but he's always good. I'm a big fan of Clancy Brown. So those four, I think, are pretty solid. The rest of them that I didn't mention just now, they're more on the other side, not great. Um, but yeah, it's I like the fact that it's not just a shot for shot remake, story for story remake of the original film. They kind of have their own spin on it. They use a lot of the same beats, or not beats, but a lot of the same material, same scenes as the original film. It follows a similar format, but they inject their own sort of spice and take on it. And I appreciate that. I'm a fan of not rehashing the same movie, so I was kind of expecting it to basically be the same as the original, which it is, like I said, for the most part. But it's got its own flavor, so I appreciate it. With the different character names and different sort of backstory and stuff. Not all of them work. Not all of it works. They're different flavor, but I give them credit for that. Um, let's see, more pros. There's more. I feel like there's more development of some of the characters, especially the sort of the quote unquote Tina character, in this case Chris character played by Katie Cassidy. I feel like she's got a little bit, she's fleshed out a little bit more, has a little bit more to do. The characters were fine in Wes Craven's 1984 movie. We weren't They didn't focus on him too long, but he did a good job of giving us enough about him that we cared about him. And even though they died pretty early, especially Tina, in this movie, I felt like that character was more fleshed out, sort of the friend of Nancy, who dies early in the film. And as I said, Katie Cassidy does a good job. More development, more scenes of like the backstory of how Freddy is Freddy Krueger that stalks these kids in their dreams. There was more backstory. I thought it was pretty effective. There's pretty good kills and gore in this movie. The film actually has a pretty effective score, I think, using some of the same beats as the original, but also having its own, once again, its own sort of flavor of sound and score, including using the song "Dream, Dream, Dream" from like 50 years ago or whatever that song came out. I thought that was a pretty effective use of that song in this movie, which was different from the original. The film is scary. I mean, it's dark, it's scary, it's disturbing on a lot of different levels. And if you know me with my reviews, when I watch a horror movie, I want it to be more scary and less comical. This film is not really comical, even though Freddy does deliver some one-liners. They're delivered more in a sadistic way, not a humorous way like they were in the some of the other films earlier in the franchise. So that's definitely a plus. The film is scary. And the film looks good visually. I think for the most part, visually, part of that's because it was made in 2010. It looks really good. Effective colors, effective camera work. So yeah, there's a lot of pros there. It's not just a pile of crap like a lot of people have tried to, at least that I've seen over the last 10 years. There's some people that like the film, but for the most part, I'd say it's like 70-30, 80-20 maybe that people don't like it. So, but of course, this film has its problems, and so I'll get into my cons now. And again, because this is a remake of the original, a lot of the cons are going to come from comparison to the original. That's just the way it is. When you try to remake a classic movie, I have to make those comparisons, and they really don't hold up in this movie. the scenes that they try to repeat, from the Freddy coming through the wall to the bathtub scene to the teen on the ceiling's death, aren't nearly as good in this movie as they were in the original. Some of that's because of the practical effects that were used in the original. Some of that is just they just weren't as creative, and they just were more lazy in this movie, I felt like. There's no greater example of that, of course, than the CGI vision, I guess, of Freddy coming through the wall, which just looks horrible. It's much, much, much more effective in the original movie, which was more of a practical effect where he's pushing through like a sponge wall or something. Well, those that know me know I'm not a fan of CGI. There's too much of it in this movie. Um, because and obviously the most notorious being that scene of Freddy coming through the walls, but there's also other areas of CGI, like when they're in dream seat where they all of a sudden you realize they're in a dream, and we see the old CGI things going on, and yeah, I'm just not a fan of CGI. I'm a practical effects horror fan. That's just the way it is. So that's not gonna the CGI and the effects they use in this movie just don't hold up as well. Rooney Mara is Nancy. I know a lot of people crap on her performance, and I'm not going to crap on her performance, but she's certainly not the Nancy that we got in the original film by Heather Langenkamp. But Heather Langenkamp's Nancy was much more effective, much stronger, um, much more of a heroine, I guess. I don't feel like this Nancy. I think Rooney Mara is a good actor. I don't think she was fully invested in this character or in this movie, for that matter. That's been well documented. She basically came out and said she wanted to quit acting. I'm not sure why she took the role, or if it was a case where she was excited about it, and then as the movie went on, it just, it didn't wasn't what she thought it was going to be. But yeah, she's not a good Nancy. Poorly cast, poorly acted, poorly written Nancy. Nancy's character also isn't the final character. She's got Quentin, who's sort of her boyfriend, I guess, in this movie that survives along with her. So yeah, that's a big negative because the Nancy character is as important as the Freddy character. And as I said, one of my biggest pro of this movie is the Freddy character played by Jackie Earle Haley. But one of the biggest cons is Rooney Mara as Nancy. Just really didn't care about her character. It's just kind of a mailed-in performance and not well written. The film also isn't as I don't feel like this film's as pure or authentic as the original. It's interesting how obviously the original movie didn't have the budget that this movie clearly did. And actually, it works to this film. It's actually to this film's detriment that it had a bigger budget, in my opinion, because the original film has much more of a claustrophobic feel, much more of a realistic feel, kind of dirty, authentic. Hopefully, you understand what I'm saying. This film's much shinier and more polished. It's kind of like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original versus the remake in 2003. The 2003 remake looks a lot better, but it's not as good a film because it doesn't have the realistic feel, and claustrophobic feel and it's the same exact thing with Nightmare on Elm Street here. It's just not as pure, much more of a high budget 2000s Hollywood film, which for me does not equal better by any stretch of the imagination. It's a 2000s Hollywood film, not as effective in tone or that claustrophobic feeling that I was talking about. There's a lot of jump scares in this movie, which is basically a trademark of a lot of 2000s horror movies. Not to crap all over the 2000s horror movies, because there's a good number of them that I really like and are part of my favorite horror movies of all time. But just not a big fan of the jump scares, especially when they're not used effectively. And I feel like in this movie, they just kind of threw them out there because they felt like, because it was a 2010 film, like they had to. I don't know. The whole preschool backstory molesting angle isn't really all that effective in this movie, and in fact, it drags the movie down, especially in the second act, because they try to explain too much of it. They try to say, well, okay, we got this whole other backstory they didn't have in the original. Now we have to. They just spend too much of the story, too much of the movie focusing on that, and you know, it's rare that you'll say there's almost too much story, but that you'll hear me say that about a movie. But there almost is in this movie because it's not really what I wanted. I felt like they had to explain it. I guess it just doesn't work. They take too much time and bog the movie down too much trying to explain it. So I talked about the characters, the acting, the four actors and actresses that I liked. Got to talk about the other side of the coin. I talked about Rooney Mara already. Thomas Dekker and Kyle Gallner are terrible actors. They're bad in this movie, and unfortunately, their characters are too important in this movie. So it definitely hinders the movie. They just do not do a good job. Kellen Lutz is hardly in the movie as Dean Russell. So I'm not really going to say much about him. I guess he was fine for the little bit that he was in it. But yeah, especially Kyle Gallner as Quentin Smith. You know, if you're going to have a final, hero and heroine as they do in this movie, and not just Nancy like the original, they got to be better than this. And I don't think, in this case, I don't think the character was that badly written. I just don't think Kyle Gallner's performance was good. It looks like he was ready to cry in just about every scene. And yeah, not good side characters. Quentin's and Jesse's are the ones that stand out the most, poorly acted. Um, this movie's just not as well written, or certainly not as well directed. Now, I don't know Samuel Bayer that well, or other movies that he's directed, but he's no Wes Craven. Let's just say that, and it came through in this movie. And finally, the last thing, the last big mistake or flaw that I saw in this movie is they humanized Freddy Krueger, which is not a good idea. Does not make it effective. They try to make it where they try to make him more sympathetic. And obviously, at the end of the film, they take that away. But they try to humanize him too much, which made the original so effective. We knew that he was a bad guy. We knew he was a guy that was going after children. And of course, in the original, it wasn't child molestation, it was child murder. And then he just continued that in his dreams. As far as the whole molestation angle, I don't really have a I know they wanted to do it different. I know Wes Craven even mentioned in Never Sleep Again, the documentary, that was his original intention, was to also have Freddy be a molester as well as a child killer. Um, and then they had to sort of sidestep it. But in this movie, he was a child molester in real life, and then he became a child killer after he was burned and then killed them in their dreams because they didn't keep his secret, I guess. Yeah, humanizing Freddy Krueger, not a good idea. There's a point at the film where they kind of make the parents look bad, like maybe they went after an innocent man. No, that's not a Nightmare on Elm Street. So yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Again, another really mixed bag. It seems like half the movies in this franchise are kind of mixed bags. This is a hard one to rate. I think I don't want to do another 7 out of 10 like I've done on 3 or 4 of my other movies in this franchise. So do I go above 7 or do I go below 7? I think I think I'm going to go under it. There's just too many flaws for me that offset the good stuff, like Jackie Earl Haley. I'm going to go 6.5 out of 10. It's not as bad as everybody has said over the last 10 years, but it is too much of a quintessential 2000s jump scare, high budget Hollywood horror film for me to rate it much higher than this either. It's fine. I appreciate the fact they added their own flavor. A lot of it doesn't work for me. Some of the characters work, some don't. Some of the acting works, some don't. Jackie Earl Haley does a good Freddy. The look of Freddy's fine. It's a different look of makeup. It works well enough for me. Some of the dream sequences work well, but others don't because of the CGI. So yeah, very mixed bag. 6.5 out of 10 is my rating. So go ahead and comment down below, guys. Give me your thoughts on this movie, what you think of it. Do you like it more than I do? Do you like it less than I do, and why? Like this video, subscribe to my channel to see my other movie reviews coming up, including my next horror franchise review, as well as my final video for this franchise, which will be me ranking all 9 films coming up very shortly. So thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye.